Hello there, my friends. Around 2 weeks ago we finished building this tiny 1 to 72nd FV432 from Takom, and if you remember from the first video in the set there was also a Chieftain MK5, and today we are going to build it, and I do have quite some interesting things planned for it, mainly the camouflage. I think you can already figure out what camouflage it will be, but I'm still going to keep it a secret up until next week. But today we are just going to assemble this little kit and maybe do some little more stuff that I haven't tried before and I've never seen anyone else try, so hopefully it works out well. I start by clipping the parts out of the sprue with my scissors. This is just ordinary procedure. I clean them up using a hobby knife. When you are doing this, be careful so you don't cut too much out of the part. Happened to me way too many times. Then I glue the parts together with an ordinary Revel cement, but you can use any other cement that you have, obviously. The lower hull is made out of 5 pieces. I much prefer bathtub hulls because they are easier to get done, because here you can get the geometry kind of wrong, but the little guide horns should help you out decently enough. The suspension is a little easier than on the FV. Here you have bogies that are made into just separate pieces. I'm actually quite surprised with this, because Takom usually overcomplicates these things, but here they are just pieces that you just glue onto the model. Then I start working on the running gear. Of course, I clean the parts and then I glue them together, mainly here on the wheels. I also made the hull a little bit bigger, so they fit on the running gear a little bit more loosely, and I can remove them when I want. Now, after they had dried, I started working on the tracks. Now, these tracks are link and length, and as you might remember from my previous videos, I enjoy making my link and length into one-piece tracks. So what I did first was I put all of the single links around the sprocket and around the idler wheel. Then I dry fitted them onto the hull with dry fitted wheels, and then I glued in the middle part between the idler and the first wheel so I could connect them together, and then from that I started gluing on the other parts, mainly this long run on the bottom, because this part obviously holds all of the wheels together, and I let it dry properly, and then I just went around the wheels with all of the tracks. Made sure no glue got onto the wheels themselves, because I don't want them to get glued to the hull. The upper part of the tracks is hidden behind the side skirt, so if you wish to, you don't have to include it, but I removed some of the side skirts, so I did include the upper run of the track. Also, these return rollers were glued to the upper run of the tracks, not onto the hull. Now, while I was letting that dry, I started working on the upper front plate. Now, there is a lot of detail on the upper front plate, so what I did first is add some cast texture, since this part was cast in real life, and from looking at references, it's quite a decently pronounced texture. So what I did, I applied some cement onto the part I wanted textured, and then I started dabbing it with a ordinary kitchen sponge. What this does is it kind of dissolves the plastic, as this is how the modeling cement works, and it creates these little dabs in the plastic that creates the ordinary, cast texture. I do it this way because the cement doesn't make it that pronounced, which is exactly what I want. But if you wanted a Russian vehicle with a lot heavier texture, you could just layer it on top of each other once it dries, and you could get a really rough texture. And here, as you can see, once it dried, I had a really nice single piece tracks that are easier to weather, easier to paint, and you know, they don't require as much work on each single wheel. Then it was up to a lot of sub-assemblies. This is a thing I mentioned in previous videos. I don't know why Takom does this, but there is a lot of sub-assemblies, so I always made a sub-assembly from like 10 parts, and then I glued it onto the hull. Of course, some of these parts couldn't have been single parts, that's not what I'm saying, but a lot of these could have been just a single mold and nothing would happen. The photo edge was then glued using super glue. I also glued on the side skirts. I made them kind of bent and I didn't include them everywhere because in my head this is like a used vehicle in some kind of alternative universe, not a completely new, not used Chieftain as all of the real life Chieftains basically were. What I really like here is that the upper hull is actually detachable from the lower hull, which allowed me to glue on the side skirts without having to, well, without being worried that I won't be able to get to the running gear with my paintbrush. Then I started working on the turret. I first glued on a few smaller details, and then I also created the cast texture, but here what you can see me doing is I am adding some the supports for the smoke launcher. The hatches were made in such a way that you can pose them as opened, but I don't really have any commander figures for this model, so I left them closed. Also, the periscopes on the commander's cupola were each a single individual piece. I was going crazy with this. And then another thing, the storage basket on the turret, on the both sides of the turrets were just separate, really thin pieces that you had to glue together. Then you had to add mesh screen inside of them, and then you had to add some boxes inside of them. I don't know if this could have been done a little easier, but I believe it could have been less complicated than this, because this was genuinely just nerve-wracking. Then I decided to add some soft storage. Now I've seen a lot of modelers use 2-piece patty for this, and I understand why they do this, but I've never seen any modelers use Thermoclay, which is a little more accessible to a normal person. If you don't know what Thermoclay is, it's essentially a 2-piece patty. It's just that it's a 1-piece and it's a modeling clay, and and it hardens by boiling it or by cooking it in an oven. So I tried using this. I just made some really simple sandbags and some really simple bags, and honestly it came out looking pretty good. I was really happy with the results. So I'm definitely going to use this in the future, but the boiling slash cooking part is kind of an inconvenience when you can have a patty that just dries in the air. So I assume this is the reason why this technique isn't used more often, or well, at all. I've never seen any of these used ever. Another new technique I used was instead of paper soaked in glue water, I actually used aluminium foil for tarps, and this technique actually worked out pretty well. It was way faster than the paper technique, and it was way cleaner than it. It's just that aluminium is a little harder to paint because it's, you know, shiny, and you get my point. But it ended up looking really good, and I'm really happy with it, so I'm probably gonna use this a lot more as well. Anyway, I would really like to thank you for watching today's video. I hope some of these techniques were helpful to you, or just the build was helpful for deciding if you want to get this model. Next week, as I've mentioned, I'm going to paint an interesting camouflage. I'm going to go with the Berlin Urban Camo, so if you would like to see that, please consider subscribing or leaving a like, perhaps a comment if you would like to support me financially. My Patreon and Amazon wishlist is down in the description. Thank you for watching, have a nice week, and I will see you in the next video.